The Supreme Court has been delayed in issuing its final opinions for the term. They're trying to go away on summer vacation. I have no sympathy or empathy for them. They're going to be working overtime over the summer on all the emergency applications, but they still haven't gotten out about a half a dozen major, they'll be earth-shattering opinions. And we'll have to look at the concurrences and the dissents and the statements and the majority opinions and the lineups in a number of cases. We cover it on a special edition of Legal AF, the podcast, meets Unprecedented, a show that I do with Dina on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. Dina joined me for the midweek edition, and we covered about a half a dozen major Supreme Court decisions, from birthright citizenship to Obamacare to what we're allowed to teach students in public school. All those decisions are ready to come out, but haven't yet dropped. We wanted to give you a kind of a reader's guide to what to expect, a viewer's guide of what to expect. And we do it on Legal AF, the podcast. And here's a clip. We're in the home stretch of a special crossover episode, Unprecedented, with Dina and Legal AF midweek with Michael Popok. So pleased to have Dina back. Dina, we're going to now run through what we can expect with the United States Supreme Court. I'll just do a quick kind of briefing on this, right? Yeah. Court opens for a term the first Monday in October, and it runs until they're done dropping opinions, usually at the end of May. This one's coming in late because there's been over 20 emergency applications that they've had to deal with, and it's slowed them down on issuing their normal opinions, which the way that a Supreme Court appeal normally works is that they take about 60 or 70 appeals during the year, not including the 20 or so emergency applications that they ended up taking this term because of Donald Trump. They do it on full briefing, sometimes with supplemental briefing. Friends of the court sometimes filed briefs in addition. There's 3 total briefs plus whatever additional briefing that the Supreme Court allows. It's a person who's appealing. It's the person that's opposing the appeal. And then the person who's appealing gets the 3rd brief. Then there's oral argument. There's always oral argument. And then there's this long period of deliberation, can last 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months before they start issuing, or longer, before they start issuing their orders. Then their opinion drops. The opinion is comprised of the majority opinion, if there's a majority, and generally there is, although we saw a case this year where there wasn't. And that is at least 5 votes. Somebody's assigned to write it by the chief judge. Usually it has to be somebody in the majority. Sometimes he takes the prerogative, and if he's in the majority, he writes it. And then others can do what they want. They can write concurrences. I mean, in that last decision we talked about the transgender, everybody wrote something. There were concurrences and agreeing in part, but not in total, and this and that, and dissents. And then there's dissents. Sometimes we see statements when it's a emergency application, which is a weird way to get on the record for the judges, the justices. And then that is the decision, unless it is one day overturned or revisited by the United States Supreme Court. Now, they also, at the same time, make other decisions along the way. Whether they're going to list a case, they're going to bring it up for next year, next term, they're going to deny it, they're going to deny a motion. They do all of that in orders throughout the week while they're in session, not so much over the summer. Then they go away in the summer, and the Republicans all go to some boondoggle paid for by the Federalist Society generally, or somebody that has business before the court. You know, all the unethical things you and I talk about. Democrats don't do that. And then they come back, usually, by Labor Day, after Labor Day, they're back meeting in caucus to set the agenda and the docket for the next term along the way. That is the overview of what you and I follow every week on Unprecedented. Normally, when we started the show, we started Legal AF, the summer was so slow. I would do one show with Ben before you and I met. I'd do one show with Ben about, that's a wrap. Let's look back what happened in 2024, 2023. And here's what we can expect in the future. That's over. That's over with this administration, this rogue, lawless, abuse of power administration. Why don't you bring everybody up to date about the major decisions, and they're going to be earth-shattering, one way or the other, that we can expect starting like tomorrow until the end of the month?
Well, probably the biggest one that I think our community is following is the Birthright Citizenship / national universal injunction issue. As we know, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments on this, and they were really centered around the question of whether or not universal injunctions should exist, which is one judge issuing an injunction, not just for the parties that have come before the court, but for everybody throughout the whole country. And both sides don't really love this, right? We have, Justice Kagan has come out kind of publicly not really liking it. The Republicans have come out because it gets used also by both sides, right? When Biden was in office, the Republicans used it. Now the Democrats are using it while Trump is in office. And the court had a chance to look at it in January, and they declined to look at. The Biden administration actually asked them to look at it in January, and they declined. So this time they took a look at it. We heard the oral arguments. You and I discussed it live, and it's still a little bit unclear how it's going to come out, because this case was like the worst case for the argument for abolishing it, because you're having to do with something as basic as citizenship, right? As basic as citizenship that clearly is universal, right? You don't really want a baby born in California to have citizenship, but not one born in Florida, right? So in a way, this was perhaps the best case to keep universal injunctions, which may mean that the court will come out and say that universal injunctions, will keep it, let's say, and not change it. We could have something as little as that, which is basically them not maybe even making a huge opinion about it and deciding the law around universal injunctions, just letting the lower court universal injunction stay. And we could have something as little as that. We could have something as big as them going into the birthright citizenship question. This was a little bit different because it was an emergency appeal. There wasn't a question asked. Every time the Supreme Court takes a case, there's a question presented, and it's like 2 or 3 lines. And that question is what the Supreme Court looks at. Because this was on an injunction, appeal of an injunction, there was no question presented. So technically, they could look at birthright citizenships, and few of the justices asked, like, do you want us to look at birthright citizenship? They may go into it a little bit because you can argue that whether or not to get an injunction, you look at the merits of the case. This is my prediction. You gave a prediction earlier, Popok, so I'm going to give my prediction this time. I think we're going to see Alito and Thomas, no matter what the court decides, go into the issue of birthright citizenship. And they are probably going to say that the law, the Constitution, shouldn't be interpreted as if you're born in this land, then you are a citizen. And they are going to do it for the same reason that we saw Clarence Thomas do the whole special counsels, that Jack Smith was basically illegally appointed, right? And then we saw the judge out of Florida pick that up. And obviously that became moot since Trump became president. That got dismissed. But to your point of like, how does a concurrence or how does a dissent contribute, let's say, to our legal jurisprudence, is it gives an indication. If Thomas and Alito go into their legal arguments for why birthright citizenship shouldn't be interpreted as it has been interpreted for the last 100 years, you will see another case be brought using their argument. So I think that we're not going to see the court, overturn birthright citizenship. But I imagine we will see Thomas and Alito argue for that in the hopes that their language gets used for a future case.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the birthright citizenship ultimately will be a loss for Donald Trump. It's sort of an easy gimme for the Supreme Court because it's such a ludicrous position to have taken. And the more you heard the oral argument, the more you realized there was no basis for it. And while the Supreme Court is willing to turn over precedent, if anybody sneezes, they're not going to turn over 100 years of precedent about what the 14th Amendment means and about what the citizenship status is of millions and millions and millions of hundreds of billions of people, including those yet to be born. So I think that's an easy win. Affordable Care Act. We've got a major decision coming out about AIDS and preventative care. I can't believe people are opposed to this. We're waiting on that one. We're waiting on online porn age verification. I think we talked about that once in Unprecedented, right? What's your view on where do you think that one's going to come down?
Yeah, that was basically a free speech argument that they made, whether or not to check the box or not check the box. That's a really good question, because we see this conservative kind of religious right conservative obviously going to be against online porn, but they also are, free speech, except they were willing to banish TikTok. So they're not always free speech. I think that they are going to allow for the restrictions. I think they're going to allow for the online porn restrictions. And then there's also the Puppy on Parade case. I love the Puppy Parade case. Not what I think the result's going to be. I love the name. Yes.
Who's against Puppy Parade books?
I know.
Why don't you, that's a shorthand for something. Why don't you tell the audience what it's all about?
Yeah, so this case is out of Maryland. And what happened there was this elementary school had as part of their curriculum reading books that were favorable, let's say, to the LGBTQ community, including a Puppy on Parade, which was a puppy weaving through a gay pride parade, right? And it was parents. This was interesting because it was Muslim, Christian, and Jewish parents banded together and sued the school district. And it went up obviously to the Supreme Court. The one feature of it that I think is going to make it so the school district loses here is they did not have an opt-out feature. They did not allow the parents to opt out. And there was a member of the school board who said specifically because they were trying to enlighten, let's say, the children. And that was kind of what the court was latching onto, was that there was a motivation here in order to, it wasn't just part of the curriculum but the problem here was how limited it should be, because I don't remember if it was Kagan or Sotomayor, brought up the fact, well, okay, if you say that if this offends your religion, you can opt out. What about teaching evolution, right? That can be considered against somebody's religion. You can be so broad. I mean, you have sex education, right, in elementary schools, and parents can opt out. That's a very standard thing. But if you start to get to a Supreme Court ruling that requires a school to give opt out, if you think it's going to offend somebody's religious sensibilities, you may be giving that school board so many restrictions that they are bound to trip up and be sued, because somebody could say, I don't like the fact that you're teaching evolution, right? This is against my thing. Or who knows, maybe AI is against it. And so that was the balancing act. I think there was a feeling that parents should be able, for the most part, to inform what their children receive in an educational setting. And on the other hand, you cannot make it so difficult to restrict the parents. If we're going to make another guess, and I'm going to go ahead and do it, is I think Justice Gorsuch is going to write this opinion. He wrote the opinion regarding transgender and the workplace discrimination case that you just mentioned before. And he seemed particularly interested in the fact that the board member was motivated. And I can see the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the families, but doing it so limited that literally they have to show evidence such as that it wasn't just that the school board approved curriculum that may offend you, but they did it because they were trying to, let's say, change your religion or change your religious point of view. And I think it's going to be as limited as that. That's my hope.
Yeah, I agree with you. That one is going to be, there's so many different ways they can go with that one. Well, that's what makes them so both confounding and sometimes pleasantly surprising. But when it comes to religion and sexuality and First Amendment, they normally don't side the way that I want or the audience wants. So we'll get them. We'll get them in our hot little hands. We'll talk about them. Welcome back. The full podcast, Legal AF, is Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Midas Touch Network. Then we take clips like that and bring it over here on Legal AF so that you can have one-stop shopping for all things law and politics. We could use some help on the audio download side. Come over to the audio podcast, wherever you get your audio podcast from, Apple, Spotify, the rest. Leave a 5-star review. Download it, watch it, listen to it back and forth, and send this clip off to people in your life and ask them as part of their journey to join our movement. That would help us. We have no marketing department. We do all this on our own, completely independently without outside investors. So until my next report, my next Legal AF contribution, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.